University of Denver. And our center is part of the Children's Bureau Capacity Building Collaborative, which is comprised of the Center for Tribes, Center for Courts, and the Center for State. And our center provides capacity building technical assistance with tribal child welfare programs throughout the country. Our services range from direct on-site activities in tribal communities to other kinds of learning opportunities such as today's webinar. And as Laura mentioned, you can look at more information about our center's resources at the tribalinformationexchange.org. We are just really so glad that you've taken time out of your busy day to join us for today's presentation, which is partnering to improve ICWA compliance. I'm sure that you will all agree that no matter where we work, that partnerships really play a key role in the success of any project. And nowhere is this more important than when we are working to support children and families. So I'm excited to hear this presentation. I'm excited about the project in general, having worked in ICWA for many years, and I know that all of you are waiting to hear it too. So I'm going to turn this back to Esther.
Thank you, Kathy. And now I'd like to take a few minutes for us to hear from Judge Morris to let folks know the history behind these ICWA partnership grants and explain a little bit more about them. Judge Morris?
Thank you, Esther. Hello, everyone. My name is Jan Morris, and I'm the Program Director for the Tribal Justice Partnerships Program at the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges in Reno, Nevada. I'm a retired tribal court judge and a member of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. The National Council is pleased to be working with the Center for States and the Center for Tribes on this grant program. The Indian Child Welfare Act partnership grants are funded by the Administration for Children and Families. The purpose of the grants is to create effective partnership practice models between child welfare and legal stakeholders, between jurisdictions, all around ICWA. To get the grant, states and at least one tribe had to apply jointly. That's one of the exciting things about these grants. They are a new, unique opportunity in this area. They are joint projects throughout, intended to be jointly envisioned and jointly implemented. All the grantees have a state and multiple tribes involved. That's why you might hear us say, for example, Oklahoma area grant, since it would not be technically correct to say Oklahoma is the grantee, because they are just one of the grantees. The grantees are to design and implement models to promote effective and timely ICWA practice. The areas that they can work on are broad, potentially even beyond some of the letter of the law compliant, like work to promote a deeper embrace of the spirit of ICWA by staff, or efforts to promote improving relationships that facilitate good and effective practice, for example. Yes, all the grantees are looking at some of the important day-to-day practices like inquiry and notice. But overall, we think it is important to understand that these efforts are all shaping up to go beyond the bare minimum of following the law, toward really deeper best practice visions and the tools to get there. I'm sure you'll find this webinar interesting and enlightening. Esther, back to you.
Thank you so much for that, Judge Morris. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to be hearing from folks from each of the projects, each of the ICWA partnership grantees. They'll be joining us. Each will have a few minutes to introduce themselves and share a quick overview of their grant. And after that, we'll transition into a panel discussion with all of the folks. So first we have Mark Erickson.
Hi, thanks, Esther. This is Mark Erickson. I'm from the Center for Regional and Tribal Child Welfare Studies at the University of Minnesota Duluth. I work with our center director, Bree Bussey, directly on this grant. We're the only two people from our 5-person staff in the center here, full-time staff, who are putting an effort towards this grant. And we partnered with NCJFCJ for their evaluation and continuous improvement. Another big feature of what we're doing with our grant is we also partner with Praxis International out of St. Paul, Minnesota, which is an organization that's done a lot of work around specifically system response to domestic violence. And we've taken some of their models for institutional ethnography and applied it to ICWA implementation. Our grant was given the name of G Anishinaabe B'Madazugwag, and basically how that was explained to us is it was given to us by an elder from a partnering tribe, and it's interpreted as so they can live the Indian way of life. And that's what we're trying to accomplish in the partnership that we have here. We're doing this work primarily in Duluth, Minnesota, but you'll see on the slide here, I kind of drew out a little square in the entire area of St. Louis County, which is right on the west side of Lake Superior, and it's larger than several states even. It's a very large county, and the work that we've been doing has been spreading out beyond just Duluth, and encompasses work throughout the rest of the county as of recently, and also in the state of Minnesota as a whole. Some of the background about how we got started, back in 2012 under the QuickWhip project, we started monitoring ICWA hearings here in the 6th District Judicial District Court system in Duluth. And then we are also providing a training in the area that our Chief Justice Judge Sally Tarnowski attended, and it was really based on that training that she kind of asked for more information and an opportunity to talk to tribal partners in the area to really see what they were looking for out of the court experience with ICWA cases, and that kind of launched our ICWA collaborative here in Duluth, which then became the oversight body that eventually led to us having an ICWA court. I put that in parentheses because I think it's just officially just ICWA dockets that we have twice a month that are broken up in sections for different area tribes to have all their hearings in like the morning of a Monday or the afternoon of a Monday or the morning of a Wednesday, and she leaves that up to them to decide what works best for them. Once we started the grant, we had a kickoff project up at Leech Lake where we had a retreat. I actually was unable to attend that, and I was really disappointed about that because I was terribly ill, but I heard it was a great way to kick off the grant, and like so many of the efforts that we do here on the project that we're doing, we always want to start in a good way and do the things we do in a good way by having elders present and leading us off. So we've had relationships that have been going on for a long time in the area, and I think that contributes a lot to the work that we do on the grant. And Minnesota has a rich history with ICWA. In fact, in that picture there, Bob Aiken on the far left gave testimony around supporting the Indian Child Welfare Act back in the 70s, and he and a couple other elders from the Leech Lake community who've been involved in this work for a very long time. We had the opportunity to hear from them in Leech Lake back in March, and that was a really exciting presentation that they gave us. Some of the activities we've been up to lately, we completed some ICWA court data collection where we were doing some specific court monitoring for the Capacity Building Center for Courts and NCJFCJ to kind of compare some court case file review data to some baseline data. In December, an Iron Range ICWA collaborative group launched. So as I said at the outset, the work that we're doing in Duluth has now spread up to the northern part of St. Louis County, and they've wanted to start something similar with their court system and having a ICWA-specific docket up there. We were fortunate to have Oklahoma, a delegation from Oklahoma visit us, and Ann Davis, another person who's presenting today. She was able to attend that, and maybe we can speak about that a little later when we talk about ongoing partnerships. And then in March, we had our annual ICWA conference in Hinckley, Minnesota, and then we also had a visit from Jerry Milner and David Kelly, and we were able to take them around this area and kind of show them some of the things that are going on here. Had the opportunity to meet with Fond du Lac and their child welfare program, and then also Leech Lake and their child welfare program, and then our state ICWA Advisory Council had a meeting in Leech Lake where they were able to attend and visit. And then in April we had a Washington Post magazine article that we were featured in, or the work here in Duluth was featured in, specifically Judge Chernowski's courtroom. And we're wrapping up our institutional analysis report. And then this summer, we're looking forward. One of the things we wrote into our grant was having a retreat up at Grand Portage, which is very close to the Canadian border. And Grand Portage, Leech Lake, and Fond du Lac are the 3 tribal partners that we have specifically this grant. So there are 11 tribes in the state of Minnesota, federally recognized tribes, and those 3 work directly with us on this. So we're excited to be able to go up to Grand Portage in June. And then as Judge Jan mentioned earlier, there's a lot of stuff that is open in this grant, and so we are just kind of following those emerging needs and just attaching and partnering and engaging with the state, with our Department of Human Services to determine how best we can support just ongoing ICWA compliance throughout the state of Minnesota. And then finally, I just wanted to touch briefly upon our approach and how we went about the first phase of our grant. And it really was doing this institutional analysis from Practice International. And we did adapt to their approach to look at how ICWA was being implemented specifically in Duluth. And so what we ended up doing is we went in and we interviewed key stakeholders. We observed people in the workplace. We looked at their forms. We went through and did a case file review. We put our court data in there. We did things like that. And then what we hope to do then is take that information and kind of create this theoretical model of change, which we're right now calling a compass, to contribute something that how we in this area will continue to collaborate and partner to create a learning child welfare system. And I think that's about all I want to say for an introduction at this time.
Thank you, Mark. I just had one question. This is Esther. In the ICWA specific docket, is it the same judge, or are there multiple judges?
Yes. Nope, it's one judge. Yeah.
Right.
It started out with just an oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. Go ahead, expand.
No, it started out with just an afternoon docket. So it went from seeing child protection cases that were ICWA cases in one afternoon. Sometimes there were, 30 to 50 hearings. I think was probably about the max, but maybe low 50s. And then it extended into a full day a month, and then extended into 2 full days a month.
Now has this judge had any particular kind of different experiences or engagement with Indigenous folks, and to be able to understand the spirit of ICWA as well as the letter of the law?
Yeah, it was very much, the ICWA court docket was birthed out of this ICWA collaborative group that started meeting beforehand, where the tribal members came and kind of expressed their concerns, and that's what, created this, or she was able to identify this emerging need to do this. And so we started the ICWA court in 2014, I believe. No, I'm sorry, 2015. And, she came off the bench. The tables are in a square, as close to a circle as possible, the tables that they have in the courtroom. Some traditional medicines were gifted. Star quilt was gifted to the court. And it just is an opportunity for tribal representatives to have more of a voice at the table, give families a voice at the table, relatives, anyone who's involved.
That's beautiful. I like that that imagery of changing the structure of the courtroom and incorporating Native ways and of knowing and being into that process. That's wonderful.
And that same launch group continues to meet quarterly.
That's great. That's there's a lot for sustainability. It's a long time to continue to meet quarterly. That's great. All right, now we're going to hear from Melanie. Are you on, Melanie? You want to share?
I am. I'm here.
Hello, welcome.
So, all right, here we are. Here are some of us from the North Dakota ICWA partnership. You see here, I'm at the University of Buffalo, but I've moved here recently. When this project started, I was in North Dakota, and that's where our work is, and that's where our very large team of people who make so much work happen is still. So you see some pictures here of some of our partners from across a lot of different institutions here. And our project started actually with some work that I had been doing helping the North Dakota State Supreme Court audit their case files. Their court improvement program was interested in knowing about their ICWA compliance. And they had a very narrow scope. They wanted assessment of what the court was doing and based on a review of records. So we undertook that review of records in close partnership with the Supreme Court and the CIP program for a couple years. But as we started looking at findings from that work, we all recognized and said over and over, like, if we really want the state of ICWA compliance to change, then we need to strengthen our partnerships across all of the different tribes and between courts and child welfare and all the different systems that impact how we touch and intervene with children. So I have a handout that I'm going to try to pull up here, just a snapshot of our ICWA compliance. Laura, can you help me open the ICWA compliance in the handout?
Is that what's showing on the screen now?
Let me see.
Hold on.
It's under handouts, ICWA compliance.
Oh, well, what's loaded is the PDF, the ICWA implementation goals that you shared. Is that not?
I uploaded another. I'm sorry to be difficult. No. I wanted to share a little snapshot of our...
So you need to share it from the screen. So if you click the bottom icon, the handouts are for participants to download.
Okay.
So if you click on the down arrow to the right of share my screen and click share document, you can upload something different.
Okay. Okay, so we did this court analysis and I don't know if I can share it with you right now, but you can download it yourself under handouts. And it says ICWA compliance in D under the little handout screen. And it shows some of the compliance rates that we were able to demonstrate over the life of a case. And I'm sharing this because it gives you a picture of the kind of data that we needed to come in with in order to be competitive for this kind of federal grants work. And having some basic data about what was happening in our state enabled us to say, we know that we have some identified needs here and we need to do better. We've got some basic data benchmarks about where we want to do better work. So for instance, we only achieved having a qualified expert witness at the time of placement or removal in about less than 10% of the cases. And at termination, even like not that much more. So termination, we're really clear it's very important, and only about 30% of our cases had a QEW at termination. And placement preference is also pretty low. So these are some areas that we knew that we wanted to address, but that we needed to work with more than the court system to get to those kinds of goals. So we had started developing a work group through the Supreme Court. I think Heather is on the line, and she was a big help with that work. And we started gathering stakeholders from across the system to support our efforts. And that was the team that came together to begin with the initial grant writing for this North Dakota ICWA partnership. And so this 5-year grant gave us a lot more resources to try to solve the problems that we had identified in our previous work. The way that we structured our work together, originally we set out as a partnership between the North Dakota Supreme Court, our state child welfare agency, our Native American Training Institute, which is a state nonprofit that specializes in work with tribal child welfare issues, the Standing Rock tribes and Spirit Lake tribe, and those were the partners when we submitted the grant. But fortunately, we have been able to extend our partners to the 2 other tribes in the state, our MHA and Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa. Our University of North Dakota is manages the fiscal end of the grant work, and our Child Welfare Training Center is housed at the university, and they train all of our workers statewide. So we were able to hire a full-time trainer who's also our project manager, Harmony Bursey, who's done great work in redesigning our child welfare training. And NADI, our partners, have supported work in helping develop the cultural pieces of the training and are working on disseminating that through the state. And NADI is also a link for us between the tribes and is working on developing and implementing our qualified expert witness curriculum and recruitment plan. And along the way, we've developed some other kinds of unique initiatives that I'll tell you more about as we get into some of the nuts and bolts. Can you help me share that first document that you shared, the ICWA partnership? So we've used a model called design teams, and we have several levels of design teams. We have an overarching design team that is the state design team, and they provide us with kind of the overarching goals and guidance. And so part of the purpose of design teams is to ensure that there's representation across systems and at multiple levels of practice, so that we have administrators involved, but also line workers who really understand the work from that level, and tribal representatives from all of their systems, and people from the states and universities, and these teams that kind of hold their work together. So early on, as a first step in our design team work, we started from a really ground-up perspective. We had the team members themselves decide what the practice priorities were related to improving ICWA in our state. So we provided the data. We said, this is what the data's told us in our previous work, and based on this data and what you know about your work, where would you decide that the priorities need to be? So this is what the team came up. We started with, I think, 6 priorities, and we're kind of adjusting these priorities as we go along. So as we kind of close up some of the goals on one priority, we can shift to another. So we went through this structured process for each of the priorities. So for instance, this first one is reduce and eliminate the cross-system challenges. And we did this labeling for every one of the goals. What's the cause? What's the effect? What does that lead to? what would we like to see, what are our current solutions in place, and what are the new solutions needed. And then for each of these priorities, a cross-system team is working on implementing the new solutions. So you can see one of our groups is a foster care group, one is active effort, one is court system challenges, one is addressing spirits of ICWA, and then we have sort of a format for the groups to work through related to SMART goals. And so we've had one grant representative plus one community leader help lead and call all these groups together every quarter. And this has been one of our big change action efforts. And then we have other groups that that meet around specific kinds of problems or issues to address. For instance, we had a tribal design work group come together made up of the tribal ICWA workers and and some county and state workers, along with our Native partners and our project manager, to redesign the way noticing was done in our state. So the tribes came up with a form for how they wanted to be noticed by the child welfare workers in the state and county when kids came into care. So the noticing before that had been driven mostly by the child welfare agency, and even though even though we have only 4 major tribes in our state, they hadn't had many opportunities to gather together, to work together, to say, as a group of tribes, we want things done in this kind of way. So this is a big opportunity for our tribal partners to come together and learn from each other about their own internal systems and how to share expectations with the states about what would be most helpful to them when it comes to noticing. So all these that I've shared are available in handouts, and you can feel free to download, and we're really friendly about the ways that we want these things to be disseminated throughout the state. I'm going to post a link to our website in the chat box, and Harmony Bercy has done a really wonderful job of collecting resources about how to apply ICWA and information for child welfare workers and other people, and it also includes a link to the noticing form and other handouts and resources that we've created, and we'd love for you to share them and use them in good ways in your jurisdiction too. So I think I'll stop there for now.
Thank you, Melanie. This is Esther again. I really enjoyed hearing the story of the partnership. Here in Maine, I have the honor of facilitating the tribal state ICWA partnership, and one thing we have always struggled with is a way to engage young people, and I didn't know if maybe that's something for the panel discussion, but as you were talking about all the partners, one thing that we have done is we have a member of the ICWA work group that's a former youth in care, so somebody that has had that experience, and I didn't know if there were people on maybe it's people that represent the tribes that are, or other people that are community folks that sit on the partnership.
Yeah, that's something that we would like to do in the future, and we're working toward having better connections and developing some teaming on the tribes themselves, but we haven't quite got there yet. Some ways that we've been able to do some creative tribal outreach is, for instance, we have a statewide ICWA conference every year and a child welfare conference. And at the child welfare conference, we had each tribe come and do a presentation about ICWA and their community. And all of those partners who came to speak at the conference brought an elder with them to talk a little bit, each of them, to talk a little bit about the history of ICWA or caring for children from their tribe's perspective. So I would love to hear if anybody else has done good outreach at bringing youth on board. We talked a little bit about that early on. One of the challenges is related to research and IRB and confidentiality. But I know some places and some communities have done that great around other kinds of work. So if anybody's done that, it'd be lovely to hear.
Yeah, I didn't even think of the considerations around IRB. That's a great point that you raised. That is could be quite a challenge. All right, well, thank you so much, Melanie. And now we're going to hear from Ann Davis. Are you with us, Ann?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. Wanted to make sure I did the mute and unmute right. I'm Ann Davis I'm with the Oklahoma ICWA Partnership Project. I am the grant manager for that. And I have been involved, kind of like Kathy, in the area of ICWA for a long time, both on the state side as well as also working with the Osage Nation here in Oklahoma. So I've certainly seen the issues and challenges from both sides. So I'm really honored to be a part of this project. So just to start, and I think there's a handout. Is the handout up? Just to start, just a little overview with Oklahoma. There are 38 federally recognized tribes here. There are 77 counties and 26 judicial districts, and over a third of the children who are in care under child welfare services are tribal. So this is important work to us here in Oklahoma. On the handout, it talks about the ICWA partnership, which was formalized really in June of 2016 by the recommendation of the Tribal State Work Group. The Tribal State Work Group had been in existence for a long time, since 2006, and really was a group made up primarily of both tribal and state child welfare staff who really came together in efforts for collaboration and to help improve things. And so in 2016, the partnership of the Oklahoma Indian Child Welfare Association, the Oklahoma Court Improvement Program, and the Oklahoma Department of Human Services really formalized. And a decision was made to apply for the partnership grant, but also that this was going to be an ICWA partnership regardless of whether Oklahoma was awarded the grant or not, and that partnership would undertake the work and effort of improving ICWA practice and in Oklahoma. So fortunately, Oklahoma was one of the three awardees of the partnership grant, along with Minnesota and North Dakota. The goal of the grant is to improve safety, permanency, and well-being of American Indian children and families through improved communication, training, and accountability of child welfare in court systems as it relates to ICWA. And so the partners really kind of divided up the work of that goal with the idea that the Oklahoma Indian Child Welfare Association, or I will probably refer to them as OICWA, would really take the lead on the training part of that goal. DHS would focus on practice and accountability of child welfare, and the court improvement program would helping with court systems as it relates to ICWA. So we felt like those were really good partners. The anticipated outcomes of the grant were improved early identification of children who are members of or eligible for membership in a tribe, improvements in both formal notice, the way that courts notice tribes when there are legal proceedings, as well as informal communication between DHS workers when there was involvement with tribal children would be improved, and also increased understanding and application of active effort, increases in early adherence to tribal placement preferences. So, and the first two, the improved early identification and the improvements in both formal notice, were areas where in earlier study, the ICWA Snapshot project that was done, it was initiated in 2012 and completed in 2015, showed that there was really a lot of opportunities for improvement in those two areas. So we're hoping through our work to make some positive impact on that. Our grant team consists of Dr. Deborah Shropshire, who is our project investigator. She is the Deputy Director for Community Partnerships, and so has a lot of experience in collaboration, and so she provides great guidance to us in figuring out how we really develop effective collaborations together. As I said, I'm the grant manager. Jonathan Moore is our grant evaluator, and Tiata Purcell is the ICWA grant coordinator. She has, and Tiata has a lot of experience both as a ICWA director for the Kickapoo tribe of Oklahoma at one time, and also through experience as in working with a child advocacy center here in Oklahoma. So we feel like we're a pretty well-rounded, diverse team. Our approach to this work is really that of using a collaboration model. And so that is agreement by a core group that wants to take action to improve outcomes. And that would have been the Tribal State Work Group, who was willing to form a partnership and do the work to apply for the grant and also make the commitment to help make changes. Key informant interviews, which gather consensus about priority needs and actions which should be taken. And collateral interviews, key considerations, which identify technical expertise and resources. The identification of local projects, including the identification of a site, the development or identification of a local leadership team, an innovative project identified and implemented, which is evidence-based, and then evaluation and adjustment, dissemination of success. And we'll talk kind of where we are in our journey on this. In looking at key considerations for projects, we look for the presence of an existing coalition or collaboration that's actively involved in making change, the readiness for change and strength in local leadership, the existence of or willingness and ability to have data so that we can actually measure whether or not there's success, and then the identification of a solution for what's identified as a problem. And then the availability of staff or other resources, including local resources, to successfully conduct the proposed project. So in talking about where we are right now, we have conducted key informant interviews statewide. We've interviewed 140 people from tribes, from the state, from courts, and other stakeholders. And as part of that process, the interview questions were very simple, very open-ended. We asked about the strengths that were there from their perception and their experience in ICWA practice, the challenges that there were in ICWA practice, ideas about change or solutions, their willingness to be involved, and also who else should be involved. So from those key informant interviews, these are the emerging themes. And I would say that probably each of those are not 100% positive or 0% negative, but a lot of diversity. And we're still kind of weighing through some of those things and determining how strong something is or how negative it is in terms of helping inform the work that we'll be doing going forward. So these emerging themes are collaboration, communication, community, courts. In some of the key informant interviews, we learned of really good practice that was going on in terms of collaboration and decision making and active participation by tribes and DHS in court cases. And then we heard of things not working as well. Human resources, leadership, policy, practice, and processes. I think one of the things that we learned there was that there's just a lot of diversity, which is interesting when there's kind of one set of laws and policy, but yet there can be such a diversity in the way things are actually practiced and the way practice is implemented. Respect, relationship, and attitude, services, financial resources, support services, training. Training was something that came up a lot in the key informants, and it was also something that had been identified even as Oklahoma was making application for the grant as being an area where there probably needed to be some strengthening, and that's where the partnership with ICWA is so helpful. They already had an annual conference that they were doing each year, and so that was just a natural place to really have the opportunity to provide some grant support to enhance and expand that conference. And then also another theme was that about tribal culture and sovereignty. So where we are now and where we've been and where we are and where we hope to go. Year one really focused on building the framework. There was a lot of work between the three partners in really developing an infrastructure that would provide oversight to the grant. The Tribal State Work Group was a big part of that, but there was also a need identified for there to be a grant governance structure, and so a subcommittee was developed from the out of the Tribal State Work Group that is a smaller subcommittee, but it's representative of each of the three partners. At this time, there are 6 members of the Grant Governance Committee, and that Grant Governance Committee actually provides oversight and guidance. The grant team reports to them and makes recommendations, and the Grant Governance Committee actually makes decisions about the use of the resources for the grant. Also, in that first year, the three partners worked together to really identify the staffing needs for the grant and developing the role for the grant team. And so those decisions were made jointly. Job descriptions were developed for the 3 positions, which included the ICWA grant coordinator and the program manager and the program field coordinator. So that was done. There were interviews that were done with all 3 partners, and decisions were made about staffing. And also in that first year was the development of the contract and budget between ICWA and DHS. And that was new ground for, I think, both DHS and ICWA, and some things to figure out and what that would look like. So in year 2, that was engaging, enhancing, and building. By October of 2017, the grant team was in place. The 3 positions had been filled. The key informant interview started, and I think the first key informant interview was in November of 2017, and there was work to continue to formalize the grant governance structure by the development of bylaws for both the Tribal State Work Group and the Tribal State Work Group. So there was a lot of work in that. There was also another round of ICWA snapshot, and that was done with our evaluator, and it was a random survey. The first ICWA snapshot was a comprehensive case review of all of the ICWA cases in Area 4 of Oklahoma. So this was a smaller number of cases, but was random, but that was done in year 2 to provide some more current data in terms of needs for practice. And then continuation of enhancing and supporting the OICWA conference and expansion of the OICWA website in efforts to help with communication and for training purposes. OICWA is in the process of developing a website that will be a platform that will host a lot of information that will be available to tribal ICWA staff as well as courts and DHS and other folks involved in ICWA practice. And year 3 is where we are. The items that have check marks by them are items that we've completed. They may still be in process, but there's been work on them. So where we are now is analyzing and reporting on the data from the key informant interviews to grant governance structure. That we're working on that. And then looking at evidence-based and best practice strategies to affect positive change and improvements in ICWA practice. We have actually started site exploration in Pottawatomie County in Oklahoma for a possible demonstration project. We're still in the process of conducting site interviews to gather information to help determine what that work should look like. So that will be probably our next step. And then, of course, with that, we'll define desired outcomes and develop evaluation tools to measure change. And then we'll continue to evaluate, adjust, and disseminate successes. Years 4 and 5, we imagine that we'll be continuing projects and evaluations, making adjustments, replicating positive practice, sharing lessons learned, and developing sustainability plans. And I think we are actually always thinking about sustainability, even as, you know, from the start of this work. We have imagined that we want this work to be lasting. And I think sometimes it doesn't go as fast as we would like, but I believe that's just part of the process of hopefully making good, lasting, positive change. So I think that's all that I have for right now.
Wonderful. Thank you, Anne. So now, now that we've heard a little bit from each of the projects, I'd like us to have kind of like a panel discussion. And if folks that are participating are on the web and they want to, you can put a question in the chat box and we'll make sure that it gets to the presenters, respond to it. But we're going to have Mark, Melanie, and Ann, and Kathy and Jan are going to join too, and also Scott Probridge. And we're just going to talk a little bit more in depth about creating these meaningful partnerships and building relationships. And I was really struck when Ann was talking about the agreement that a core group of people came together and made an agreement. And I'm always interested in how groups maintain that commitment and that agreement that they made, and how they revisit that and how they keep that in the forefront, because I know it's a difficult work in itself, and it's more difficult work when you're trying to develop these collaborative partnerships between tribes and states around ICWA. So if there's anybody, Mark or Melanie or Ann, have something to say specifically about that? Mark, do you have anything to share about that, how to revisit those agreements and how to keep that in the forefront?
Yeah, well, the work that we do, you know, we take a relational worldview to the things we do. So many of the projects we work on, we strive to be good relatives to one another and the partners that we partner with. And sometimes I wonder how much we overburden them with their time and their resources, and like, what are we meeting about today? You know, are we here for this or are we here for that? And it's a lot of time to ask for people, and I'm learning how important it is to really when people take the time to get together to really make sure it's used productively and that people get a chance to check in and voice their concerns and to just reiterate why we're meeting and the important work we're doing. Because I think, in the hustle and bustle of getting everyone together, sometimes that can get lost when you're just meeting as a formality. So you want to make sure you're not just meeting as formality, but you're trying to have substantive dialogue and conversations and reorienting to the thing that's brought you to the table.
Great. Yep, that's so important because it's easy for us to lose that focus. Melanie, did you want to share something about that?
Sure. It's hard. We have so from the onset, we knew that the relational piece was one of the major causes we thought of problems with ICWA implementation. So even at the beginning, we said that's one of our goals. And then how do we measure that? Well, there are some measures out there, and they don't capture all the things you want them to capture, but we are trying to meaningfully use. We're using a scale called phrase collaboration scale, and I'll write that down in the chat box after I'm done talking. But that's one of the ways that we're measuring collaboration, and that basically asks each participant at the table how much in relationship they think they are with all the other people represented on the grant. And we're trying to use that as one way to measure the dial. But we've had major leadership disruption. We've had either the social services director or the tribal director or tribal ICWA director turnover or is in the process of turning over in every one of our tribes. And we had our social services director for the state left under difficult circumstances. And I moved to a different state, and our University of North Dakota, who houses the grant, has undergone major administrative changes, and all these things are disruptors. We had the Standing Rock protest, and that impacted our grants in multiple ways. One, that it really absorbed all the time and energy of the tribe for the first year of our project, and they were one of our key partners. But two, it had a major impact on tribal-state relationships because of the way that the police behaved in the state. And so we have these events that just bring up lots of histories of hurt, and at times partnerships can feel very fragile. But in doing the work, it's easy to point a lot of fingers and blame the other agencies related to how things are getting done, and it's harder to do that when you're sitting at the table together. So I think one of our focuses is just on making sure that there are representatives from lots of different places, and to remember that relationships are a work in progress, and we're still working on them, and sometimes they're hard. And we've got to just keep showing up in a good way and remember why we're there. And right now we're doing some talking about what leadership means to us in our individual roles, because when we're doing hard work together, it's hard to not be prickly with each other sometimes. And we just have to remember that this comes from everything about where we've been and who we are, and a lot of times it's driven by our fears and hurt, and so together we just have to turn back to why we're doing the work. But so I guess all this is to say that, like, if you are thinking about partnerships and thinking, oh gosh, our state people would never sit at the table with our tribal people in a good and respectful way, that it doesn't happen instantly. It happens through a long process of trust and through, like, showing up even when it's hard.
This is Anne. Sorry, I've lost my sidebar, so I can't raise my hand. I just wanted to add that one of the things I think that we have focused on here in Oklahoma has been to make, like the Tribal State Work Group, a more formal organization. And also, I think in terms of partnering and coming to agreements, the process of contracting and sharing money are ways that we are really developing true partnership here. And so we, sharing money, staff, and the grant governance oversight. I talked about the grant governance subcommittee as having representatives from all three of the partners that really are in that process of doing joint decision making about the activities of the grant. So I think that has been one of our strategies. The Tribal State Work Group, like I said, it's been in existence for a long time, and sometimes it has had more cohesiveness than at other times. It's also sometimes been more productive, but it has helped to make some things come about. The ICWA snapshot that I talked about, the one that started in 2012 and I think was completed in 2015, and Casey Family Services helped to provide support. That was something that really helped to show where we were in terms of ICWA practice, that had there not been that Tribal State Work Group, it might not have ever come to that. Another thing that the Tribal State Work Group was involved in was the expansion of the tribal coordinator team. At one time, there's always, for many, many years, there has been DHS staff dedicated to that, but it has gone from like a part-time person to one full-time person to now there being a team of like a program manager with 4 tribal coordinators. And so I think also seeing that those groups of people can have some power in helping to shape practice and resources also is helpful.
That's great, and it leads me into my next question, thinking about how partnerships address power and privilege. And I think that's what you described as a real structural kind of way to address it. And I'd be interested to hear from any of the folks, presenters, if it's something that's talked about openly, or how this addressed. Because we know that there is a highly disproportionate rate of Native children that are in care, and we can't really discuss that without talking about power and privilege. Does anybody want to share ways in which that has come up in the group and how you've addressed it?
I think one of the structural things that has happened in North Dakota that our team on the ground there is done is the meetings in our state so often were held at the state agency, and our work groups have been good at rotating where people meet. So our Native American Training Institute has hosted several of the meetings. We've had meetings at our state ICWA conference, and we've thought about the way that representation shows up at the meeting. So, for instance, at the tribal work group meeting, there are more people there from the tribes than from the state that presents the work that they wanted to do together.
Great. Mark, do you have anything you want to add about that?
Well, I can say we've had a couple situations where it's been addressed head-on, and the response from to the people representing dominant cultural groups has been pretty good. But in general, yeah, being up here in the way northern Midwest, it's always hard to approach those topics directly, and sometimes everyone wants to do better, and everyone recognizes them, but it is a challenge to make sure that we recognize how power and privilege is not just playing out as this abstract thing that we have no agency in, and instead is something that we're confronting in ourselves. Another way I was thinking of when Melanie was sharing about key participants, going through transitions or not being there. We haven't had any major losses like that on a permanent basis, but just that whole idea where tribal agency practitioners and leaders are so busy and have so much going on, and often have to make these trips into town to meet or something like that. It's just so important to make accommodations and go to them where they're at and meet them in their space and just level that so that those voices are still included even in those occasions where they can't be there at the table. But I would say in general, it's definitely an area that we need to work on as far as individualizing how we address power and privilege in ourselves and as a group.
Yeah. In my experience with tribal state partnerships, what I found was real helpful and critical was to figure out ways to enable everybody to bring their whole selves into the process. And what I witnessed and what I learned, as I'm a tribal person, I'm Passamaquoddy, and what I learned about non-Native people was that one of the outcomes that I saw of power and privilege was not being able to bring themselves into that process, being real stuck in the roles that they had and not being able to, they knew why they were in those positions, but their jobs and the structure and, the of their systems didn't allow them to bring their heart into it, I guess. So that was a real good learning for me because it helped me to have compassion and empathize with people and like you said, accept people where they're at. I wonder if we could talk a little bit about, I've heard this term and I've used it before, indigenizing the process. If any of the groups have talked about that or have, incorporated rituals or anything into the meetings that would indigenize the process or make it more inclusive and in a way addressing those issues of power and privilege in space.
Well, as I mentioned in my introduction, when we do have an elder present, we have a tribal councilman from one tribe who comes down and joins us for our tribal state partnership team name specific to this project. And then we have a tribal court judge who also joins us and will typically offer tobacco and ask them to start out our meetings in a good way. And I think there's a lot of exposure to those types of things, and everyone is pretty good about going along with it and being respectful and making a space for that. And I will say that is definitely a feature in the work that we do. And when we started this project, actually, one of those elders had said, what we really need to do is create a system within a system that has its head and its heart in balance. And that's been kind of like our mantra when we get these things started. And then, as I mentioned too, we had our grants project kickoff with a retreat and the ceremony. And now as we kind of get to this next phase where we're getting all our initial data together and kind of seeing where we're at and diving into the real, heavy work part of it, we're going to do that again where we're going to gather for a day and a half and have another ceremony. And that's how we're going to kick off the next phase.
Right. I was going to bring us the conversation in a direction, but we have a question here in the chat box, and someone's asking, what does power and privilege mean? So what are we talking about when we're talking about addressing power and privilege? Is there anybody that wants to respond to that? Mark? No.
You want me to?
No, I was just reading your thing. I thought you were okay. No, you don't have to if you don't want to. I can address this if no one else wants to share their perception or what we're talking about, power and privilege. So
I'm happy to. I think it would be an exercise in power and privilege if I kept talking.
No, not at all. You're the presenter. I would rather hear from you. Go ahead, and I'm sure others can join in.
Sure. Well, yeah, for me, it's just recognizing, what we carry when we go into a room. And I think that idea that you shared, Esther, about people representing an agency or something, that carries a certain power with it. But even just our identities, our culture, our background, it creates dynamics in rooms. And if we're not tuned into those dynamics and that they're happening, and we find ourselves being the only one talking and no one else is speaking up, we need to step back and recognize that, hey, maybe people aren't speaking up because of, where I come from or what I look like or what my role is. And people don't feel comfortable often having a voice or a place when people with power and privilege aren't intentionally checking that in themselves and sharing the power that they have, whether it's, through kind of socioeconomic things, whether it's through your job title, your role. If you're not checking that in yourself and creating a space and where other people can be, I won't say empowered because you're not empowering them, but you're repowering them. People have ideas, they have thoughts, they have things they want to say, and you want to make sure that they feel comfortable in a space to say those things.
Yeah, I was thinking as we were talking, I was listening to folks that in indigenizing the process or in creating space for everybody to be able to bring their whole selves in, it really benefits everyone. I know, non-Native folks that I have worked with, particularly white folks here in Maine, have remarked how much they look forward to the meetings that we have, that they can, when they come to our tribal communities, or when we meet outside of the tribal communities, when we meet together, because some of our natural ways of being, for instance, the importance of visiting with each other. And one thing I learned is, visiting is not something we do before the meeting starts. It's part of the meeting to connect with each other again. And for Native people, it has quite a distinct meaning, and the non-Native people begin to appreciate that, and in turn start to take care of themselves more, and it benefits everyone, and it benefits our work. So I'm interested. I wondered if we could talk a little bit about how there's a long history, and I think Anne talked about how long this partnership had been established before becoming one of the projects here. So just to talk a little bit about sustainability, and not only project sustainability and funding, but how the group sustains itself, and how you've come this far and gotten through a lot of challenges. Listening to Melanie talk about the first year of your project, where the Standing Rock protests were happening, that I can't even imagine what that would have been like. I know folks want to talk about some of those challenges and maintaining sustainability.
This is Melanie in North Dakota. I'll say that as we start getting closer to the end of our project, we're 3.5 years in now. This is, I think, on everybody's mind, and maybe especially Harmony, who's done such good work as our project manager, and so we're looking at structural ways to sustain some of this work. And Harmony's been thinking a lot about how the new how 4E money might be leveraged, and how this work might benefit from the new funding models in child welfare that place a little more emphasis on prevention and supporting families. And we're keeping our eye open for other grants, but thinking about the ways that partnerships can be built into existing or ongoing work groups. Like, I know some of our work will continue through our court improvement program, and whenever we've been able to, we've built work groups or projects into places where people already naturally gather, so those gatherings will continue, such as our STEP program, which is the partnership between the tribal and state and county child welfare directors. We meet at existing conferences, and hopefully people will continue to go to those conferences so that relationships will carry on. And we've tried to develop some processes that will sustain, such as the noticing forms work, and some like website resources and things like that. But we're working toward, hopefully in the next year, we'll develop some online training, which will be sustainable even if we lose some of our on-the-ground training support. And we're trying to leave like some products that can be used for continuing training and education too. But it's a challenge.
That's great. Anne, is there something you'd like to share about sustainability?
Yes, I think that sustainability has been on our mind from the start. And so I think that with utilizing our approach of collaboration where there's consensus and buy-in, we hope that that will be helpful in really making changes that are sustainable. Also, with the thought of having the tribal state work group become more formalized, where there is more ability to help change or shape practice and policy, we hope that that will help in terms of sustainability and improving ICWA practice.
Great. And Mark, do you have anything you want to add?
I would just add that I often say, we were here before we started this project, a lot of us, and we'll be here afterward, I hope at least. And but this idea that you brought up earlier, Esther, about the next generation, it's really important to get people involved who can continue the work if specific people aren't there when the work is over. And I think we've done a pretty good job identifying some like younger supervisors within public and tribal agencies who are now starting to come to the table and getting involved, and we're incorporating them into some work group teams. And their experience and their insight and their passion for this is so important for keeping things going. So I think it's nurturing the team that you have, but also building up the team that comes behind you and joins in later. And where that kind of gets difficult with ICWA implementation is you want to do compliance, and as I said earlier, the state of Minnesota, through the Department of Human Services, and there's just so much ICWA energy here around compliance in Minnesota right now that, we're kind of focusing on the spirit of ICWA, as was mentioned earlier. And that's tough because you want compliance and you want consistency and sustainability in your processes and how you do ICWA, but it's also there's a heart attached to ICWA, and it's how do you transfer that heart energy to people as they're coming on board or they're getting into this work. So one of our younger supervisors that has joined us talks about that frequently, you know, that there are just some people who are called to this and some people who seem to be not called to it. So we really want to make sure we're finding people who are called to it and engaging them while at the same time coming up with compliance initiatives, structural things that support the work for everyone to be doing a good job in a good way.
Great. Thank you, Mark. We had a question. George had a question. Are there any features of your relationship building that seem more urgent to get done now with the larger attacks on ICWA in the federal court?
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about that a little bit as grant project directors across our multiple sites. Like, is there a way that we can leverage the work that we're doing as national partners to lend some voice and support in more formal ways in response to some of the national attacks? So it's something that we're going to think about at our upcoming conference where all of our grantee teams meet together. And our team, our ICWA team, has also come together to write letters of response within our state to some of the attacks. But we've also realized that we have a role in coming together to clear up misrepresentations about some of the national news. So, for instance, we got together and our state child welfare partners put out a notice that said, like, ICWA is still the law, because people were really confused when the Texas Supreme Court came out and said that ICWA was unconstitutional.
Yeah, I mean, that's been at the sport. I would just say that I've been really kind of paying attention to what I've heard, and so far I haven't seen some of those federal attacks affect our relationships within our group, but I've definitely been paying attention to what I hear from kind of within the child welfare agencies, because I'm really curious how that affects people who maybe are involved but not at the table with us. But I haven't seen anything directly affecting our relationships at the table, but we definitely have talked about them in our meetings.
Thank you, Mark. And we probably have time for one more question from Jill. There's a few. What should the tribes be doing? The court in Duluth is not a specialty ICWA court. Should Judge Karnowski leave the bench? What would happen if there's no ICWA specialty court? What if the new judge decides not to continue with the ICWA format? Does anybody want to address that?
Yeah, this is Scott from the Center for Courts, and I think I can't answer that specifically for Duluth. I've been there. I've been to that court, and but I can't speak for them, calling in from Washington D.C. But I think one thing I'd highlight around that, as a broader question, is what should tribes be doing? I'd highlight that with all these projects, there was work going on before they got these grants, and there's other states that didn't get these grants or didn't apply that have collaboration, system change work with tribes and states. Court improvement programs, it's even in their program instruction to be collaborating with tribes that border in or with, and child welfare agencies should have an interest in supporting ICWA. So, get invited to the table or demand to be invited to the table, and you can work on these things and institutionalize these types of efforts. And I think it's obviously much easier said than done, and it goes back to all we heard about, really, the measuring the social interactions and relationships, which I think is really unique and brilliant about these grants. But there's, that's a really good question, and I almost reframe that as, what can we do to institutionalize good work that's happening, or what can we do to get good work started. And here we heard from these other states, and we'll share this link to this webinar where we heard about some other ways that people have gone about it. So I think there's the resources, and there should be the interest out there to get you started, and we're available to help too. I can put my email in there. We have partnerships with the states and others, so we might be able to connect you to people.
I would also suggest, knowing the disproportionality in your state, and you can find that information online if you don't know it offhand. Who is it that puts together the data center for child welfare? So that's one way to, if you're a tribe, to show up to your partners and say, this is what's happening, and is this part of your 4E plan, or is this part of your program improvement plan? Because a lot of times, if there's any work going on at all in the state is saying, oh yes, we have this partnership and that, and they're using it to prop up their plans, but the level to which they're actually doing it in a way that supports true collaboration and partnership varies. And you can use that as a strategy to say, you're telling the feds that this is the way that you're addressing this issue, and we really need to be at the table to have input on this kind of decision making. Or pose curious questions, like I shared with you that we found that the rate of qualified expert witness use and placement preference was really bad in our state, and I think that that's probably pretty common across the nation, but a lot of people aren't measuring it. So every state has a courts improvement program, and part of their job is to collect data and intervene about things that are happening in their child welfare and juvenile justice courts. So find out who your CIP person is and go tell them that you're interested in informing and supporting their work to measure the degree to which your state is following placement preference or qualified expert witness use. And that will put you in a better position to say that the state needs to provide more resources, or to look other places, foundations or the feds, for grants to support interventions in your areas.
Great. Thank you, Melanie. Well, I think we are out of time. Laura's going to give us some final instructions, but I want to thank everybody for tuning in today, and thank you so much to our presenters. I learned a lot.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for having us.
Before folks sign off, I just want to point out again that the handouts that were shared today and the presentation materials are available for download right from this webinar screen here. I'll leave this room open for a bit so that you can get all of those should you want them. All you need to do is click on the title of the document and click Download File, and you can save it right to your desktop. You will be getting a survey after this webinar. I'm going to send an email with some of the links that were shared in the chat today, along with a link to a survey from our evaluation partners at the Butler Institute. If you could take a few minutes to respond to that and just let us know what you thought of today's webinar and how well it worked for you, that would be wonderful. And I'm also going to, again, in the chat, share the link to the Tribal Information Exchange, where you'll also find a lot of the resources we talked about today, and the recording from today's webinar will be posted there next week. But a huge thank you to all of the presenters and participants who were able to join us today. We really appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.